Good morning, and good afternoon to our South Africa delegation with the time change. We are so excited to have you all with us for day 2 of the Rethinking Church Virtual Summit. And can I just say thank you to everyone for going out and purchasing the book yesterday. We hit #1 new release in 2 categories. Christian discipleship, which for bestseller, we're behind one of the Bibles. So I don't know if we can if we can overcome the Bible, and in social issues and Christianity. So thank you. Please continue to share because we would love to hit bestseller status, but we are the #1 new release in 2 categories on Amazon. So appreciative to you guys. The Kindle version is only 99 cents through Friday, and then it's going to go up. You can also get the paperback, and we have a beautiful hardcover, but it's filled with so much great advice if you want your church ministry to have an impact. But this morning, OMG, if you guys know me, you know that I'm a political junkie. I love talking politics, and I have brought together 2 dynamic women. I've known Kynesha for some years. I don't even remember when we met, but we're both from Alabama. She is doing the work in Alabama politics. You guys, drop her a note, encourage her to run for Senate. That's the the push. I know she gets tired of me posting that on her comments, but I truly believe that she has a very bright future in politics. And then we have Miss Denise Dupree. This lady is just a young dynamic. And I say young because I know she's breaking so many records in her state and just the work that she's doing. So let me bring these ladies to the stage. Hello, Kynesha. Hello, Denise.
Welcome. Good morning.
Hey, so I'm so excited to have you guys here. Kynesha, I will let you start. Just introduce yourself, tell our audience a little bit about you, and then Denise, you can introduce yourself.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kynesha Brown, and I hail from Montgomery, Alabama. And I just want to first say thank you for allowing me to be in this space. Thank you, Reverend Womack, for inviting me, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. But I think since I was young, before I can remember, I've kind of been engulfed in political involvement, voter engagement. I think I remember my grandmother just kind of handing me some pamphlets to knock on people's doors to get them to vote for people who I didn't even know who they were at the time. But as I got older, been heavily involved with voter engagement, especially helping marginalized communities to get not only registered to vote, but to also be knowledgeable of the political electoral process. And we do a whole lot of other things, such as helping those who have been impacted by felonies, getting their voting rights restored, as well as transporting people to the polls on election day. And believe it or not, that's not even my day job. In my day job, I am a public relations director and lobbyist. So looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Awesome.
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Denise Dupree. I'm an alderwoman in the city of Grambling, which is in north central Louisiana. First off, I would like to thank Reverend LaKesha Womack, my Yale classmate, for inviting me on and having this. I think this is really great. But I got my start a lot like Miss Kynesha Brown here. Just doing activism in the community. I went to college at Louisiana State University, where I was able to start working in state politics at the Louisiana State Capitol before coming back home to my hometown of Grambling to run for office. I'm currently serving in my 2nd term. The first time I ran at the age of 24 and 1 and was the youngest woman currently elected in the state of Louisiana. I would have been the youngest person elected. However, my cousin, who's 3 years younger than me, ran for mayor in a town 2 cities over and won. So we served as the youngest man and the youngest woman. There's currently a woman now who is younger than me who is on the city council in another city in Louisiana. And kudos to her, just keeping it going with getting more women involved with politics and more young people involved with politics, which I think is extremely, extremely important as we continue to progress.
That is so amazing. And I think like one of the reasons why it was so important to have you two on for this discussion is we don't see a lot of Black women in the South in these positions. And I think that if we're truly going to change the culture of our politics, we have to change who is involved. And I think that you two represent two different spectrums of that involvement, from elected officials to working behind the scenes, as I know Kynesha wants to do, but we'll talk about that later. So I want to start off with our question. What do you all feel? Because you are working in politics, you're on the grounds, you're doing the work. What does the church need to do to build more political power in their communities? Like, what is missing? What's not happening? And we can start with Denise.
Just simple community engagement. Which I know that sounds very cliche, but that's really what it comes down to. I was watching the Black News Channel the other day, and they had Dr. Jamal Bryan on, and he made a very good comment that stuck with me, that I said I had to make sure I mentioned during this discussion today. And he said that the church tends to be stuck in Facebook and the world is on TikTok. And so just, Kynesha and I both being, young, and you as well, LaKesha, just us being, young, it's going to take that connection of engagement to the younger generation in order to get the church onto a progressive platform to where it can continue actually having dialogue with the community and even with our elected officials, in order for things such as policy. I'm on the city level, so we call it's ordinances here, but just so that engagement can go on and our ordinances actually match and our policies actually match what's going on in the community in order to best serve the community.
What are your thoughts, Kynesha?
A lot and all over the place, actually. Because, being raised in the South, and I know that both of you can attest to this, and thinking of our history, being born in Montgomery, this was the epicenter of the Montgomery bus boycott. It was led by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. Go 30 miles down the road from Montgomery, you hit Lowndes County, Bloody Lowndes. Go even further, 52 miles, you're in Selma, Alabama, which was, the bridge crossing. And, thinking of all those movements, a lot of the organizing, the strategy meetings happen in the Black church, right? So political movement and mobilization is nothing new to the church, but just kind of along the years, it just kind of phased out. And I think that kind of comes from the misunderstanding of what the separation of church and state is. And they just been kind of backed away from that. But going back to what Denise was saying earlier, thinking out of the box, you really have to go meet the people where they are. And I know a lot of churches often do that in their ministry, but you have to kind of go deeper than that when we say meet the people where they are, meaning that you have to kind of get out of your comfort zone of being, judgmental. And I'm not saying that, churches are judgmental, but sometimes we use our faith to kind of cloud our judgment into actually seeing the person despite what their vice or maybe their position is on something. And sometimes you just have to have those conversations and move away from actually talking to people and talking with people. And I think when you talk with people instead of talking to them, you get a better understanding and a better relationship to kind of build more engagement and mobilization. But definitely kind of meeting people where they are and actually going back to that notion of having those strategies of mobilizations within the church.
And you made a very good point, Kynesha. You talked about how at one point the church was kind of the epicenter of organizing and activism. What do you think happened that changed that tide? Like, why does the church? And I know you mentioned like this false notion of separation of church and state, which I tell people all the time. If that was a real thing, then the Republican Party would not be the party of Christian conservative values.
Yes.
Like the fact that Christian.
Yeah. So, and I think a lot of people kind of get a little misconstrued with that Johnson. We call it the Johnson Amendment, where it separates church and state. But the only thing that really prevents the church from is endorsing political candidates, although we've seen in the last election cycle that some people have with that to make a decision. I know we're not trying to get on sides or whatever, but it's true.
Right,
Um,
right, right.
but the part of educating your congregation, talking about policy issues, simply talking about the electoral process, what it takes to not only get registered, but to keep engaged to make sure that you're abreast of all the elections that are coming on, and understanding, that politics involves everything that you pretty much do from the federal level
Yes.
all the way to the local level. And sometimes we get so focused on what's happening on the federal level, and those offices are important, but like things that Denise is doing in her local in Grambling on the local level, and what's happening in your state legislature impact us way more than what we could think about on a federal level. And sometimes we miss that mark on that. And I think when churches, have those informational discussions and, just keeping engaged, let them know, hey, you can do a simple um message in your announcements about, hey, it's an election coming up. Voter registration deadline is such and such date. Make sure that you're registered or have your kids registered by this date so they can vote in the next election. Have a voter registration table set out when your hostesses are meeting people coming into the church. Simple things like that will engage people and make them more aware. But I think I kind of went on a tangent um, with that because you asked me a simple question about the separation of church and state, but I think it's just more so that misconception of what exactly separation of church and state actually is.
And I would like to add to that, with that separation of church and state. I live in the rural South. Grambling is we're considered a Booker T town. We're one of 5 Booker T towns left in the United States where we're still an all Black municipality as we were founded upon. You're
Mm-hmm.
not getting elected unless you come to church and speak to the
Mm-hmm.
congregation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's anywhere from your city council level to your school board, to your state rep and state senator level. It's just,
Mm-hmm.
it's not happening. You have to come
Mm-hmm.
and talk to, Miss Hattie on the matron's board, Mr. Earl on the deacon's board,
Mm-hmm.
if you want to get elected, because that's where your engagement comes from. And on the outside of the church, in terms of reaching the community, there's been times where, we, for instance, like say we'll have a bad storm to come through here and our water might be out or our electricity is out. 9 times out of 10, it's the church that's, okay, well, let's go make food, and give out water to the residents, when us as the government entity, we're trying to either, okay, let's get some federal funding in or some state funding. And the church is really the one that still to this day steps in when we can't quite get to where we need to go as fast or get to our community as fast. And so I'm agreeing with you, Kynesha, the separation aspect of it is more so, I would say, policy, and like quote unquote the legality terms and ethics of, we can't technically endorse someone. But
Right.
in the rural South, and especially as a Black woman in politics, it's like, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you're not even getting elected if you're not coming to sit in on Sunday or Wednesday services.
Right. And then to add on to that, and I'm sure our audience can attest to this, anytime there's election cycle, and I know it's heavily here in the South,
Yes.
who comes in your churches on the Sundays shaking hands and
Yes.
kissing babies and making
Yes.
hugs?
Yes.
People running for office. And normally when they get elected, you really don't see them coming back to the church. And I'm saying that to say that in addition to the mobilization and the engagement, you also need to take into accountability. There is
Yes.
nothing preventing churches from having candidate forums where
Yes.
you invite your candidates to come speak on the issues and understanding, their politics and the issues that they're running on. And when I say that, and I hope and I pray I'm not stepping on toes when I'm about to say this too, but as you're hearing their politics and their issues, also learn to discern what is considered, the policy under their office. Because you can have a city councilman or an alderman that will come in and start preaching about, they're against or they're for abortion and they're going to do this once they're elected. But you need to understand that a city councilman has nothing to do with
Yes.
reproductive rights.
Yes. Yes.
So, don't, listen to them when they pander, but also understand, and I hear what you're saying, but how does that impact in your role of what you're running for? So,
Mm-hmm.
um, having that accountability in churches, having those political forums so you can understand their politics, because we also have to get out of, and I say we because there's a lot of us that do that. We know
Mm-hmm.
people from the neighborhood. We probably went to school with them. Oh, they're
Mm-hmm.
a pretty nice guy. I'll vote for them. I see them all the time, you know, hanging out in the grocery store,
Yes.
which is
Yes.
good.
Yes.
But how are you going to affect me as a
Yes.
constituent once you get elected into office? Yes,
Yes.
you can hang a suit, you dress pretty well, but I see you on social media all the time. But
Yes.
what can you do once you're elected to office? And we have
Right.
to get back to the meat and bones of political office and
Yes.
running for
Yes.
office.
Yes.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of times, because you guys said like so many great things, but a lot of times we have a tendency to vote for people based on personality instead
Mm-hmm.
of based on like competence. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you might be a nice person, but can you read a balance sheet? Because if you're going to be a part of the city council, you kind of need to know how budgets work.
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
don't think that, we do a very good job, because a lot of it does come to who comes to church and shakes hands
Mm-hmm.
and kisses the babies. And just because that person is doing that and you see them and they, as we say, ask for your vote, does that mean they're qualified for your vote? And
Yes.
I don't think that we really do a very good job around like voter education. So, yes, like there are 5 candidates, and here are each of their positions, or here are their position statements. Let's see
Mm-hmm.
like who's actually makes sense and who is actually, able to do the things that they're saying that they're going to do. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, like there's so much work I think that needs to be done around that. I
Okay.
would like to ask, and we'll start with Kynesha, like one of the initiatives that you're working on is helping to restore voting rights for people who have been previously incarcerated. Do you
Mm-hmm.
find that the church is involved or wants to help with those types of initiatives?
hmm Here in Montgomery, yes, there has been a few churches here who have partnered with the organization I'm part of, which is called Rome to the Post Voting Initiative, where they have hosted voting rights restoration clinics to where people can come and get information on how to get their voting rights restored, and
Wow.
also offered other resources to where um, they can get, expungements and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Recently, actually last week, there's a local church here, in Montgomery. I'm out of town at the moment. True Divine Baptist Church that did a second chance job fair where they
Mm.
had employers who hired people who
Nice.
have been recently incarcerated or had a conviction, and they get hindrance from trying to find a job. So there have been churches that are getting involved in that type of work. Of course, we need more because in the South, there is a church pretty much on every single block in neighborhood. So just imagine if we had all of those churches serving as epicenters for those type services. So
Yes.
very
Yes.
important.
Yes. Yes. Most
That would
definitely.
be so amazing. And we are
Mhm.
praying that you guys are listening and you will take some of these tips and look at how you can have an impact. And I think that that is one of the ways. We actually have Dr. Otis Moss, who's going to be our keynote speaker after you guys. And one of the things that he talked to us yesterday is when they evaluate projects that their church is going to get involved in, they ask
Mm.
3 questions. Is it Black? How does it affect Black people? Is it green? How does it affect the environment? And how does it affect the previously mass incarcerated? Because they really
Mm.
have a passion for ensuring that those persons have a second chance and that they do
Mhm.
and that they are able to re-enter society and stay out of prison. So I think
Mhm.
that, as we're looking at economic empowerment, that is definitely a way.
Oh, most
Denise, I
definitely.
have to ask you, so as an elected official, what would you like to see from more of the church communities to help you do your job and to be more effective?
The informative aspect. You were just talking with Miss Brown about like prison reform and engagement and everything. But just something simple as, so for instance, in Louisiana, a lot of people don't know this, but after you have served your time and you're no longer quote unquote on paper, which is, you're no longer on probation or parole or anything like that, you get your voting rights back. A lot of people don't know that Louisiana has a very, very, very high prison population. At one point, we were number one in the world for prisoners per capita. Yes, fortunately now, we have a governor, John Bell Edwards, who's a Democrat, who has done a lot in terms of signing legislation that contributes to a lot of prison reform, which is great. I tell people all the time, as we said, those local and state elections make a big difference. A big difference. And so what has happened is, a lot of time, or what's going on is that a lot of times people just, don't know that that's the case. And I won my first election by 2 votes.
Wow.
One of those votes came from me telling somebody that they had their voting rights back and they needed to go register to vote. But something as simple as pastors on Sundays just informing their congregation of the voting process and the policy surrounding that, things you can and can't do at the polls. A lot of churches around here do what's called a souls to the polls. Where we have early voting and it's like, okay, let's get in the church van and we're gonna all go vote. I'm fortunate to have a pastor, Reverend Dr. Earl Griffin with Lewis Temple CME in Grambling, who is engaged in the policy process. He comes to our city council meetings and therefore goes back to, the congregation and can tell them what's going on in the city and how certain policies work. So just that simple piece of just information can be very, very vital of how, we can go from A to B. And being in the South, again, we do have a lot of policies that come up that pertain to things that are going on locally, but making that connection from local ordinances to state policy, and even a lot of times state policy to the federal level, and making those informative connections so that our constituents, when they go to the polls, they're informed, they're engaged, and that they just simply know what's going on. It makes a huge, huge, huge difference. I would say, especially right now, we're in a way right now in an age of like misinformation. And we've seen a lot of that, especially in 2020. We've seen how people are responding to, COVID, and we've seen how people are responding or not responding to getting vaccinated. And a lot of that just comes from misinformation that's going on. And so just with the church being still very, very crucial in the South and very, very crucial in the Black community, just something as simple as just information, it goes a very, very, very long way.
So, and when you were talking, the thought that came to my mind that really has me distressed, like, I just have to be honest, like, I'm distressed about the state of like our voting rights and the Voting Rights Act. What can we do? Because I refuse to believe that like we're just helpless in this situation. But what do we need to advocate for? What can we be doing to put pressure on legislators to take action on voting rights? And even in some of the states where they're trying to pass like these restrictive voting rights bills, what are some things that we can do to get involved in this work? And we can start with Kynesha.
Where can I start? Let me start with a highlight. So what we saw, like 2020 was just like a very unprecedented year, right? The world literally shut down. We were kind of stuck in our homes. But and I kind of say it was just kind of really like divine spirit that happened like on November 3rd. Despite, people being stuck in their homes, there were still groups still mobilizing to get out the vote. And what we saw on November 3rd were a lot of new voters, especially Black voters, that voted in that election. And then we saw what happened in Georgia, who is really kind of considered a Southern red state, literally flip to get more, Democratic progressive type elected officials. And then in January the 5th, we saw that even more. We was like, we're because a lot of people were thinking like, well, that's not going to happen, 2 times. They got that victory November 3rd. It's not going to happen again on January the 5th. And, they double up and did the thing, right? But what we saw happen after that, a whole lot of legislation rolled out in about 25 states that attacked voting rights. We saw a lot of heavy voter suppression laws that hammered down, and Georgia really got the brunt of it because they did not want to see more people of color, more regular middle class, lower income people vote. And I'm saying that to say when people sometimes get abreast of what your power entails, they want to do everything to prevent it and hold it back. And what I've noticed with elected officials, and I'm sure Denise can probably attest to this as well, you listen to your constituents.
Yes.
Like if a person is involved, they have an issue or whatever, they'll call their elected official up and they will talk to their problems or state their issue.
Call.
And that elected official will listen to what that constituent is saying. Something that we don't do on a larger scale is contacting our elected officials and holding them accountable. We think that we kind of sit by and, see things are going and, we were like, well, that's wrong. My elected official isn't going to support this because that's wrong. And we think because we think like that they should think like that too. And there's not really any action behind it. Not, well, I'm not going to say 9 times out of 10, 7, 8 times out of 10, that elected official, and more so in conservative states, maybe more so 4 times out of 10, they may not think like you. And they won't know how you're thinking unless you contact them and call them and have those needed conversations. And that goes back to having candidate forums and things like that, or having town halls or community engagement forums. Community. I saw a question in the chat: what could churches do to kind of speak on issues if it's like one-sided or leaning to a particular elected official or party? Have an informational session about it. You can just have a form about it that states the facts, what this bill entails, what it will do, what it won't do, to have those conversations. You have to find some kind of mechanism in place to where you can have a direct line of communication with your elected officials. Also rally your congregation, your community up so they know what's going on, so they can also act too. One thing that I have been pushing on my social media this week, Black Women in Action have been doing a rollout for people to call their senators about the For the People Act, to get people to call. And we're using messaging like, and it's the truth. If voting did not matter, they would not put so many things in place to prevent it from happening. So with that being said, and they're trying to do things to push us back and hold us back, call your senators to let them know what's going on. Because a lot of things that we've been seeing progress have been trying to push back, and not in addition to voting rights, there has been a lot of rollout in a lot of states that's centered around critical race theory, what it is and what it isn't. And the misinformation and the disinformation has been so bad. We have seen people rallying school boards, to say they don't want it in their schools. They need to stop doing it, but it's not being taught on a K-12 level. So it's just a lot of frustration and misinformation. I'm like, all they got to do is go to Google and look it up and see this is not. We're not doing the job of putting out that information, telling people this is what this is. If you want to stop it, if you want to push this, contact X, Y, and Z. And I think, that will help to get people more involved on that level. We got to get people, because, going back to meeting people where they are. Not everyone is on social media. Not everyone goes to the church, but your ministry goes out into the community, right? So as you're going out into the community to help out and doing things in your community, you can also share that information about voting, about things that are going on, not to take a side on it, just by having a conversation. Hey, there's an issue of voting rights that is happening right now. And this is where it is right now. This is what's happening. This is how to get involved if you want to. And when you have those conversations and talking with people, not at them and not to them, they will get involved. And I've noticed this in the conversations that we, had. And going back to people who've been impacted by felonies, Denise, you said you won by 2 votes, right? Which is like phenomenal. But
Thank you.
in our walk in our camps, like 2 votes, that is like good. But and when we're doing like our neighborhood canvassing with Rolling to the Polls, I'll never forget. I met a gentleman who was 62 years old, and I want to share the story because he was a deacon in his church. And went up to him and asked him, was he registered to vote? And we think when people are older, we assume that they're already registered to vote. And his response was he couldn't vote. And I was like, well, what do you mean you can't vote? And he started speaking about his felony conviction that he got like many moons ago, probably like 25, 27 years ago. And it was a drug felony possession. And when I asked him what exactly was his conviction, I just kind of lit up and started smiling. He was looking at me crazy, like, what's going on? I was like, you can simply go register to vote. And he's been out of prison for probably 12 years. Yeah, reacclimated into society, stand-up citizen, goes to work every day. Like I said, he's a deacon in his church. And for all this time, we had in Alabama, we had a moral turpitude law change that rolled off about over 200 convictions, to where some of them you can get is dropped to where you can just simply go register to vote. Wow. But they would not do a good education program until that happened. And this gentleman did not know all he had to do was fill out a registration form to go vote. So once I told him that, he was just like in shock that he did not know this. So of course we got him his form. I gave him my contact number. I was like, look, I'm going to tell you when I take this to the board of registrars, you should get something in the mail in about 2 weeks. And you'll be good to go. And ever since then, this has been like 2 years ago, it was back in 2019. He used to text me all the time. He was excited when he got his voter registration card. On election day, this is when we had our municipal election. We had a big municipal election for mayor and city council.
Oh,
he called like 7:00. He's like, I'm heading to go vote. I'm like, okay. Need a ride? He was like, no, I'm good. And I mean, just giving me updates throughout that day, standing in line, on the vote. He sent me a picture with his voting sticker. He was number, I think, 60 something in line or whatever. Wow. And we had conversations that day. And what was so phenomenal about that day was that it elected our first ever Black mayor here in Montgomery.
Yes.
Excited about being able to vote for his first ever Black mayor in Montgomery.
Yes.
And ever since then, we have conversations every now and then. And I'm saying that story to say that's just one person who's been impacted about getting engaged to vote. And it all started with a conversation. So just imagine if you're in a church and you're having a ministry that's going to have those conversations with people to get them more involved. That's just now he's telling everybody that he knows about the process, so they can also get their stuff involved.
Yes.
So, I mean, it's ways to do this without getting into the muddying of picking a side or choosing a or things like that. And I know I'm too much, but I just wanted to share that. That was just,
No, that was great, because I think that, that's what it's all about. Like, not only with the voter registration, but just how we have an impact in our ministries. It's about relationships. And so often we're just like, oh, we just want the people to come. But it's like, if you're not assessing what are their needs, where are they in their lives, where are they financially? Because if someone can't give, it might not be because they don't want to give, but they might not be able to give. Or, you're trying to do a ministry with the homeless, but you haven't checked to see if there are people in your congregation that are home insecure. So we have to make sure that we know where people are that are in our congregations. Denise,
Mhm.
what are your thoughts on like where we are with the voting rights? Because in Louisiana, and you guys having a Democratic governor now, you know the impact of a Republican governor versus a Democratic governor. And I mean, and people that, and it's like, we've been saying like, you think that your one vote doesn't matter, but that could be the difference between having a Democratic governor or a Republican governor and everything that comes after that.
Oh, most definitely, most definitely. Something you mentioned, Reverend Womack, was that if it was something like if your vote didn't count, kind of they wouldn't do all this to try and keep us from the polls. So a few years ago, Louisiana did away with Sunday early voting. This was under a Republican governor.
Mhm.
And so what had happened was, when you go back and look at the numbers, that early voting on Sunday was the highest turnout for Black voters
Mhm.
in Louisiana. That should have made everyone mad, because they were specifically targeting our vote. And what it was, we get out of church, we go straight to the polls, and we go early vote soon as we get out of church. In a small community, in a Black church, we're gonna go vote and we're gonna come back to the church and eat. So that was how we had very, very high turnouts in the past. A Republican governor saw that, along with the Republican legislature, and they did away with it. Well, recently, just this past legislative session, Representative Jones, Fred Jones, he's a Black state rep, he's a Democrat, wrote legislation to extend early voting. The governor signed it. We don't have our Sunday back, because we do still have a Republican legislature now. While we don't have our Sunday back, they extended the time in which we could have our early voting hours. I've always been an early voter, just because I know on election day I'm either campaigning or assisting with other things and trying to get people to the polls. But just something as simple as voting like that goes a long way. Or how our voting hours are structured, voting locations make a difference, and that all comes down to who we elect. Our commission electioner in Louisiana is the Secretary of State, that handles all of that. And so something I preach. I'm also I'm a college professor at Southern University Shreveport, which is an HBCU. Something I teach my students all the time when it comes to things like that is that you have to pay attention to those little elected positions that a lot of people don't think about. Most people don't think about who the Secretary of State is, or the Attorney General is. It's like, hey, I'm gonna go vote for governor, somebody I know on the local level. And I have to tell them how these other positions, this is part of the information part, how these other positions that you go and elect play a very vital role in the process of how things work. A lot of people, like I said, just don't know. Okay, oh, Secretary of State's office handles on, that's an elected position. So that means we have to go and inform ourselves on who's running for that position and where they stand on voting rights, because that's going to determine how our future elections turn out. And even the process of, on the state level, how we do have a Democratic governor, but we have a Republican legislature. And so a lot of times, informing people as well as my students, just because this is where the governor stands, that doesn't mean that that's going to necessarily come to fruition, because the voting body is the legislature.
Right.
And so, Ms. Brown, you mentioned something earlier when you were speaking, just about sort of that like engagement and everything within the community, with the gentleman being excited about electing the mayor in Montgomery. And that's something I noticed as well with my students when they've gone to the polls to vote for the first time. It's like, oh, it's that, just that excitement of knowing that, I had a voice and I made a difference. And I remind people all the time, as elected officials, we work for you. And so I really want a lot of us, especially my young people, to understand that you all are the boss. And so I always ask the question of, you're the boss, you're the CEO. Are you happy with what's going on right now? you would fire an employee for doing some of these things that
Mhm.
elected officials are doing. So have that mentality, because we're paid off of your tax dollars. So not only are you paying us, when you elect us, that's the same as you all hiring us. You also have the power to fire us by not voting for us again. And even if you sit at home and you don't vote, even not voting still, in a sense, I always say this, not voting is also a vote, because now if you're not voting, that's a chance for someone to get in that doesn't meet your needs. And
Mhm.
so I tell them all the time, you have to think with the mindset of a boss, or you have to think with the mindset of a CEO, and truly remember that your elected officials work for you. And that's how you get the engagement going. And that's, oh, I went and voted for such and such. And then just, keep it going. Show up to the city council meetings. You mentioned about, calling elected officials, and typically it's the old, my older residents, they have no issues whatsoever about calling when there's a pothole, if a street sign is missing, or if they're
Mhm.
having issues with their water. I mean, even
Mhm.
certain things, I always make the joke about how our electricity, it's run by a private company. I mean, if their lights are out, they're calling me. I'm like, my lights are out too. I don't work for the power company. you know, but just that level of engagement goes a very, very long way, because they're looking at like, hey, okay, somebody need to make a call over to the power company up there at town hall and let them know what's going on. So yes,
Mhm.
definitely that engagement. It goes a long way, which I feel like the folks that are trying to stop, put a cease the voting rights and, cut back on our voting rights, they understand that, but I need us to understand that as well.
Right.
Mhm. Mhm. And then I want to kind of piggyback on something you said earlier, where you're talking about contacting your elected officials, keeping them abreast too. Also, we one thing that we have to understand is a little bit different from what we're talking about at the time. But when we're going to have those conversations, of course, you're going to come across people when you're asking them about getting involved, in the process or whatever. They may be apathetic about it.
Yes.
Yeah.
They may be like, I don't want to vote. It's done nothing for me, or things like that. And what I've noticed in some organizations, um, in different people, we get on the defensive when
Yes.
we hear about that. And I can attest to that because I have been guilty about that too when I first
Mm,
got into this work.
mm,
Especially growing up in Montgomery, hearing the history about it and everything. When I hear
mm.
somebody saying they didn't want to vote, I used to be like, "What? What do you mean? People died for your right to vote?" And blah,
Yeah.
blah, blah, blah. And then I have to understand that everyone is not politically astute about the process of things like that, and they may be
Mhm.
so far removed from the movement that they may
Mhm.
not be able to
Right.
understand what happened.
Right.
So when you have those conversations and you're trying to get them involved with issues, have that conversation. Okay, well, why do you feel you don't need to vote?
Mhm.
Why do you feel this way? And sometimes when I talk to them, they kind of like, well, every time I vote, nothing changes or whatever. I still got this 4-bedroom size pothole on my street or whatever.
Mhm.
I was like, well, you need
Mhm.
to call the person who's responsible
Yes.
for this. And and try to kind of correlate it to saying, look, there is a process for this to get changed. And if the
Mhm.
person who elected isn't doing what they said they were going to do, or haven't done anything since they've been elected, you have that same right to vote them out.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
once they understand that, they also get more engaged with that. But you have to go back to having those conversations and understanding why politics involves pretty much every single thing that you do. And I'm so glad that you brought up about the positions that people don't really think about.
Mhm.
Secretary of State is a very important position in our states, especially in southern states.
Mhm.
Like here in Alabama, I'm not sure about other states, but we also have a position called the Public Service Commission that's
Mm.
responsible for your utility rates
Mhm.
here in the state of Alabama. And we have rural areas in Alabama that are paying like six, seven, $800 in utilities and don't have the same, makeup
Yes.
of other cities. They don't have the other
Wow.
resources, but that's powered by
Wow.
the Public Service Commission.
Yeah.
They're
Wow.
responsible for regulating those utility rates.
Wow.
So you can organize people regarding that, because our public service commission has been heavily Republican, heavily
Mm-hmm.
white, that may not, care for lower income or rural type communities. So
Mm-hmm.
that's something that you have to do. Go to your states or your areas, determine those positions that people aren't talking about, and focus what those positions entail. You can kind of
Mm-hmm.
map out what those positions are, responsible for. And I think you
Mm-hmm.
can also rally people behind that as well.
Yes.
Well, ladies, it's hard to believe that our time is almost up. We have like a minute or so, but I want to thank you so much for getting up early this morning. If you guys don't know, they're both in the central time zone. So I know they love me to be up at 7 o'clock in the morning to have this conversation, but it's definitely something that I think is needed because we have to be honest about where we are and what we need so that we can make a change. Because when 2022 and 2024 roll around, like I can't even imagine like the dirty tricks that are going to come out, and we
Oh
have
my
to
God.
start thinking
Start
strategically.
organizing now.
Yeah, we have to start organizing now. Like we can't wait until like August, September, then be like, all right, what we gonna do? Like we have to start
Mhm.
getting people thinking about these issues and deciding like what role do we want to play, because and that's the thing, like there's so many different roles. And I saw like Pastor Lowe posted how, for pastors who are too busy to go to city council meetings, but you have a congregation. So identify like the nosy person in your congregation who wants to be in everybody's business. Send them to city council, because they can be, as they call it,
Yes.
like your town crier. Like they can be the person that goes and gets the information and brings it back to everybody. But we
Yes.
have to like make sure that we're getting more people involved and then we're sharing this information, because politics affect us from the local level, the state level, the federal level, and everywhere in between. And if you think politics doesn't affect you, like just sit down and think about your daily life, from how much you're paying in taxes to how much you're spending on your electricity. Like, anyway, so thank you guys. Yes, and Kynesha put her information in the chat if you guys want to engage with her. She's doing a phenomenal work. Denise is doing a phenomenal work. Have to
Thank
do a shameless plug for the campaign school at Yale. All three of us went through that program. That's where I met Denise. Denise went through, I think, a couple of years ago. And if
you.
and I think they've opened it up to men now. So if you're
Yes,
interested,
yes,
yes,
yes.
so if you're interested in learning more about campaigning and organizing and all of that, then feel free to apply. I think you have to have a recommendation, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure if you have a conversation with any of us, we would be willing to, write that recommendation for you.
Yes.
So before we
Mhm.
go,
Okay.
I would like for each of you to share like one thing that if people don't take anything else away from what you said today, like what's one thing that you want them to walk away from this conversation with? And we'll start with you, Kynesha.
To have those hard conversations, and definitely to step out of your comfort zone to meet people where they are, to get people engaged. And then also, one to add one tip, because we didn't discuss this during the call, and I saw one comment about it: redistricting.
Mm-hmm.
Redistricting is going to be incredibly important. And some of the states have already mapping out plans and public hearings. I know Alabama already has a list of their public hearings straight. Make sure you check into those, and that's a way for your church to also get involved, because that's going to be very important, going into 22, and actually affecting us for years to come. So make sure that you are all involved in, abreast of what's going on around redistricting as well.
Yes, yes.
Yes, very important.
Mhm.
Denise, your final comment.
Get involved. Please, 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 your school board elections, your city council meetings, your state legislative sections. Please, please, please get involved. In Louisiana, we have parishes, which is similar to everyone else's counties. Those meetings as well, just that local level of engagement is
Mhm.
extremely important, because as Reverend Womack says, this is what affects our everyday lives. So please, please, please get involved on the local and municipal and the state level, and utilize that engagement just simply to make the quality of life not only better for yourselves, but your neighbors and our future generations.
Mhm.
Awesome, awesome. Well, thank you, ladies, again. Everyone else, you have about a 10-minute break before we come back to the main stage for our keynote presentation from the Reverend Dr. Otis Moss III. So excited to hear from him about the work that they are doing in Chicago. And just we're ready for a wonderful day. So you all have a wonderful rest of your morning. And thank you all. We will see you in about 10 minutes.
Thank you.